Microvision moves into the 1980s with a mighty library of 4 games before Milton Bradley discontinued it. The system ends with a whimper, not a bang, on Game Boy Works Gaiden.
I hate Illinois Nazis.
So we begin this final run with a brave, but maybe foolish attempt to recreate America's favorite pastime on computer hardware dating from the 1970s. No, I'm not talking about roller disco, I'm talking about baseball. Now, baseball is one of the more complex sports to adapt into video game form, as we've seen on consoles. Beginning in 1983, baseball games on both Intellivision and Famicom began to separate the baseball experience into 2 phases. Not offense and defense, but rather batting and fielding. During the batting portion of baseball, the game plays out as a duel between 2 people. Not just a test of skill, but also something of a mind game, as the pitcher tries to catch the batter off guard, and the batter attempts to predict and respond to the speed, direction, and behavior of each pitch. Once the bat connects, the game becomes a larger scale team challenge as the fielders catch and coordinate movement of the ball. Some people find baseball boring, but back in the 1970s and 80s, it was super popular here in the US and in Japan. So that means baseball video games. God, so many baseball video games. But the Microvision, well, the Microvision really couldn't begin to handle the nuances of baseball. I mean, this was a system that was ideally suited for a tennis simulation at best, and we didn't even get one of those. Maybe because the dinky CPU couldn't handle the demanding task of controlling a computer opponent. This raises the question of how one simulates the entirety of baseball on such a simple little system. The answer, of course, is that one doesn't. No baseball for Microvision consists entirely of the batting phase. You do not play as defense at any point. No fielding, not even pitching. In the single-player mode, there's not even really a win state, since the other team doesn't take a turn at the plate. You just hit the ball until you've completed 9 innings, and the game tells you your score in the end. As you might expect, baseball does not offer much complexity in the batting simulation that it does feature, either. The pitcher can throw a ball that drifts a pixel to the right or to the left, but it seems like the speed varies slightly from pitch to pitch, and that's really it in terms of challenge. You swing by rotating the Microvision's controller knob counterclockwise. Rotating it clockwise until the bat reaches a neutral position prompts the pitcher to throw again, and then you just spin the knob at your preferred speed in order to hit the ball as it crosses the plate. The face buttons on the system see barely any action. They're mostly there to select game options and display the current pitch count and score. I guess Milton Bradley deserves credit for even trying to streamline a sport this involved to work on such a limited handheld. And frankly, the decision to turn this into a simple batting contest, that is, the fun part of the sport, with no need to fuss over the fielding aspect, makes this one of the less irritating baseball titles of the era. The only way you could make a more entertaining sports game, in my opinion, would be to just include a CPU versus CPU mode, so the player doesn't have to bother at all. As we saw with Connect 4, Milton Bradley was not shy about using its analog properties as grist for its digital content mill. So I am at a loss for why Duel is called Duel and not, Battleship. Milton Bradley owned the rights to the classic board game Battleship at the time of Duel's arrival in stores. A game of military tactics and educated guesswork, Battleship has served as fodder for video games and films alike over the years. And it certainly loomed large in the pop culture zeitgeist in 1980 thanks to its memorable "You Sunk My Battleship" ad campaign. A phrase so iconic to the Microvision's core audience that Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey would use it as a gag a decade later for instant comedic resonance with those same kids.
You have sunk my battleship.
Excellent!
Heck, Battleship even plays on a 10x10 grid, a setup well within the bounds of Microvision's paltry 16x16 pixel screen. You'd think this would have been a shoo-in. But no, Duel is not Battleship, and it does not give you command of an entire fleet as you attempt to fire shots at your opponent's fleet and land successive hits to take out their fleet of ships. Instead, it involves only 2 vessels, a surface-based destroyer and a submarine. You can choose to control either ship, leaving the other in the hands of the CPU, or in the hands of a second player for past-the-system alternating play, all the while attempting to outguess your rival. I suppose I can kind of understand why MB's programmers didn't opt for a full Battleship recreation here. Although you have enough pixel space to lay out a fleet, it would be difficult to depict both fleets and to note the differences between a ship and a ship that's taken damage with a limited screen space and 1-bit color depth. It could have been done, but it would have been messy and complicated. So instead, you get a one-on-one duel between a surface ship and a U-boat, in the classic Das Boot or Balance of Terror style. As a result, the game plays out in a very different fashion than Battleship, becoming a new game in the process. If Battleship unfolds in an alternating move-by-move format like Final Fantasy Tactics, Duel unfolds by side-based turns, like Vandal Hearts. Oh, sorry, I'm skipping over about 20 years of game evolution here, but you see what I'm saying. Duel allows you to queue up several actions for a single turn. Your ship can move and attack a couple of times in a single phase. And if you're playing with another person, there's no Battleship-style fog of war here, as you can plainly see your rival's position. But because both players queue up their commands, the game turns into a contest of predictions. Which direction will your rival move? Which direction will they fire? You want to move out of their anticipated attack path while lining yourself up to take a shot and score a hit. The asymmetry of the ships plays into this. The destroyer is a large target, 3 pixels long, while the sub is a single pixel in size. This makes the sub much harder to hit than the destroyer, but the destroyer commands greater firepower, where the sub can only launch a single pixel torpedo that has to connect directly with the other ship to score. The destroyer fires broadsides in either direction, filling a 3x3 that has 9 pixels space with its ammo, making it quite dangerous to the sub despite the sub's tiny size. It's not Battleship, but it's honestly pretty compelling all the same. Simple but entertaining, offering just the right combination of strategy and guesswork to feel fair but unpredictable. I'm sure Duel would have sold better with Battleship's name attached, but Milton Bradley's engineers had good instincts here. Instead of attempting to create an overly elaborate version of a popular analog title that would have been a confusing mess on Microvision, they designed a cartridge that worked within the bounds of the system. It's the same design philosophy that would power the best Game Boy games a decade later, and Milton Bradley sorted it out right here in 1980. If only more developers had been paying attention. On the flip side, we have Cosmic Hunter, which is generally regarded as the final entry in the Microvision library. But I'm putting it here as next to last because it seems wrong to end the series on the sour note of the worst game in the console's library. If we want to be generous, we could say that Cosmic Hunter plays like a combination of Western shootouts like Sheriff and maze chase action titles like Pac-Man. Considering that Cosmic Hunter shipped the same year as Pac-Man, that makes it pretty cutting edge. Or it would be if it were designed better. Alas, what we have here is nothing less than a confusing, half-baked idea of a game. The concept of a plan for a game. You play as a dot. You move around a field littered with other dots, and your goal is to seek and destroy yet another dot. Yep, dots all, folks. Cosmic Hunter does have at least one slightly interesting detail going for it. It's the closest thing you'll find on Microvision to a game powered by D-pad controls. The button arrangement on the Cosmic Hunter touchpad forms an orthogonal cross that allows your dot to move left, right, up, and down. You can also press another button to shoot. This then is the entirety of the game. You move around the field of dot obstacles, trying to close in on the enemy dot so that you can destroy it with your dot. The enemy dot skitters away to the best of its ability, so you need to corner it in order to take it down. If you get too close, the enemy dot will make a horrible noise that kills you. But here's the rub. The fire button does not command a weapon that can take the enemy dot down from a distance. No, you need to get right next to the dot in order to destroy it. In other words, Cosmic Hunter involves chasing after a dot and then pressing a button the split second you catch it, because it can turn the tables an instant later and destroy you. This isn't the design basis for a great game, and it feels even worse to play when you have to use the Microvision's thick, unresponsive button pad in order to move around and attack. Really, the most interesting thing I can say about Cosmic Hunter is that this design was more or less the basis for an infamous Famicom bootleg release called Super Maruo about 6 years later. A game that's notable not only for being the first known unlicensed Famicom cart, but also for being the first pornographic Famicom bootleg, as the action revolves around chasing down a girl and removing her clothes once you catch her. Come to think of it, maybe there actually are worse legacies than being the mediocre final release for a forgotten game system. And finally, we come to the end of the Microvision lineup with Alien Raiders, a game about invaders who want to invade from space or something. Alien Raiders sees players defending against, shall we say, invaders. And given the title, it stands to reason that these invaders come from outer space. However, you won't mistake this for some other game about invaders from space, because these raiders approach the planet from the right side of the screen rather than from the top. Totally not the same thing, but certainly something that might fill you with excitement. Derivative theme aside, Alien Raiders, not to be mistaken for Space Raiders, does mix things up meaningfully by making use of the Microvision rotary dial. Your planetary defender fights automatically against the raiders, moving up and down all on its own. You fight back against the raiders by tapping the fire button when you line up with one. The raiders move right to left at a steady rate, and you need to take out each one before it hits the left edge of the screen. You can't control your horizontal motion, so you have to zap each alien when your auto movement creates a window of opportunity. You can lock yourself in place momentarily by holding the fire button, but for the most part you just need to time things carefully and shoot at an alien as you pass through its row of screen pixels. That on its own would not be especially challenging, so Alien Raiders puts the rotary dial to use. Spinning it right and left, well, clockwise and counterclockwise, causes the length of your laser beam to change. Spin clockwise, and the beam extends further across the screen. Spin counterclockwise, and it shortens. You can only destroy an alien when you hit it with the tip of your laser beam, which means you don't simply need to fire when you're in the same row as an alien. You need to adjust the length of your attack so that your beam's endpoint hits the same pixel cell that the alien occupies. This makes for a pretty challenging game. But as Space Invaders clones go, whoops, I said it, it's reasonably interesting and, like Duel, takes unique advantage of the Microvision hardware without trying to overcomplicate things. Does this make for an all-time classic? Well, no, don't be stupid. Nothing on Microvision is. But it demonstrates once again the importance of creating software that complements hardware, especially in the portable space. Even if Microvision hadn't directly inspired Nintendo's Game & Watching Game Boy, that alone would make the system an important part of video game history. And that, as they say, is that, at least for Microvision. But there are other pre-Game Boy handhelds to look at, and I'm sure we'll get to those someday.